Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Geesaman Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather we live in extraordinary ones where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives to share resources to help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes and sign up for our newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. You can also become a supporting member of our podcast with a small monthly donation. Look for Embodiment Matters at patreon.com. Hello, friends. It's Erin here, and I'm so delighted to be back with you. I can't believe this is the 4th season of our Embodiment Matters podcast, and we're delighted to be revisioning and rebirthing what we're doing here. One of the new things this year is that, in alignment with the strong nudges from many of our own mentors, students, and friends, we're bringing more of our own voice and teachings to the podcast, as well as many wonderful guests. So today, I'm going to be sharing with you about one of my favorite topics, and this is a Sanskrit word known as Maitri. I like this word so much. You know, sometimes there's a word in another language that just conveys in a concentrated way something we don't, we can stumble over for paragraphs in English in this case. So Maitri is often translated as loving kindness, but I particularly love the way some teachers in my lineage have talked about Maitri as brave befriending, courageous friendliness, a brave, unconditional warmth. I love that it's named that it takes courage and bravery because it does. It's not easy. It's a courageous practice to work with this quality of warm-heartedness toward what is in our inner experience, in our outer lives, not without healthy boundaries, of course, but with very clear orientation toward Maitri as a core value. So before we get into this any further, I'd like to share a perspective, which is that in the way we teach and practice, we don't start with the open heart. We always start with the ground and with growing our embodied presence. So let's do that even before we get into this podcast conversation. I want to invite you to take a moment to just let your attention settle downward in your body with some curious reverence, feeling where in this moment you are being met by support. So if you're sitting, under your pelvis, maybe under your legs and feet. If you're standing, under your feet. If you're lying down, whatever part of you is in contact with support, just take a moment to let your attention be magnetized to this living relationship between your body and support. And I love to make the invitation that's kind of radical in this modern culture, which is to relish your own weight and to practice being generous in giving the weight over to gravity's exquisite invitation. So really be generous, like someone who is a good hugger, who could melt into that physical embrace. You can do that through whatever part of you is in contact with support. And the more you can be generous in giving your weight and inhabiting this relationship with some awareness, we can really take into ourselves, into our tissues, into our hearts, the felt experience that there is unconditional support beneath us. So why don't we just take a few breaths to take that in? One of my favorite lines from the incredible poet Joy Harjo is when she says, "Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters." And inhabiting your weight and offering it with generosity to the earth, so you can be in that relationship of receiving the unconditional support, even if you're on a chair, on a floor, on the fourth floor of a building. Ultimately, that support is coming from the earth. So let's start with letting the earth stabilize our post-colonial insecure jitters. Then I want to invite you to bring some attention into your lower belly, especially that area between your belly button and your pubic symphysis. Just for the next few breaths, notice if with that support beneath you, you might be able to soften your belly a little bit. The late, great teacher, Stephen Levine, was a powerful teacher for me in this topic of soft belly. And he said you can directly diagnose the hardness in your heart by the hardness in your belly. This isn't talking about your muscle tone. You might have a nice relaxed six-pack, or you might have a generous belly that you're holding tight. It's really about this quality of giving space for yourself in your own body, making space for Maitri, for compassion and loving kindness with your soft belly, if you're in a place where you feel safe to do that. So beginning to deepen a relationship with our embodied selves and this sense of unconditional support that's always there whenever we remember to notice it. Beginning to courageously experiment with inhabiting, I call it being empelvised, embellied, empowered, to really inhabit this lower part of the body. Gives us an important foundation where when we do start to open and soften our hearts, we're not just blown out. We're not just overwhelmed by all the feelings. We have some ground. We have what they call in Japanese, hara. There's that, I call it being empelvised and embellied and empowered, that potent presence in your lower body under your heart. It's like having a somatic foundation. So having begun with that, I'd like to bring a quote forward, which is one that I've been thinking a lot about in the last, maybe less than a year, since I read Barry Lopez's last book that was called Embrace Fearlessly, The Burning World. It was published posthumously. And in the chapter called Embrace Fearlessly, The Burning World, he points out that evidence of the failure to love is everywhere around us. And I find that so heartbreaking and such a simple and clear and honest way to describe what we see when we look around at environmental destruction, social injustice, abusive relationships between people and animals, between people and themselves. Evidence of the failure to love. If we just pause for a moment, take a breath with that, notice how it resonates in your own body. Where do you notice a failure to love? What I really love about that is that even in such, in many ways, dire times, confusing times, tumultuous times as what we're living in, it's a very simple and clear way to perceive what's happening. And implicit in his way of speaking to this is the sense that we could do something about it. We could not fail to love. We could love courageously. We could love better. We could love in wider circles. We can do that. And I just feel weepy actually considering this, because I'll tell you, that's what I'm going to spend how many ever years I have left on this planet. That's what I'm aiming to do, to love more, to love better. In everything that I teach, whether it's deep ecology, the Feldenkrais method, somatics, listening practice, grief tending rituals, etc. Really, this is at the heart of it. In any of those things, whether we're looking at how to become a better human on the planet, how to have more eco in our logic, whether we're learning to be a better listener or to be more compassionate and holding space for grief and sorrow in ourselves and others, whether we're learning to inhabit our bodies with less domination, more clarity, more presence. In a certain way, in my heart mind anyway, all of those can be boiled down to this essential ingredient of love. And I particularly love the word Maitri because it's an invitation to courageous befriending of our experience. I have another quote I'd like to share with you. I've been a quote collector since I was a young teen, and many people just say it so well, I'm going to nod to them rather than rephrase it myself. So, in a beautiful little book called Open and Innocent, The Gentle, Passionate Art of Not Knowing, which is a great teaching right there in the title. It's by Scott Morrison. In the very beginning of the book, he writes this. It's on a page called The Whole Teaching. He says, the path of awakening and liberation requires that we ask ourselves just this one fundamental question. Do I wish to live this moment with as much attention, care, and affection as possible? Or am I going to do something else? And he goes on with this very important PS. There is no point in judging the something else as either good or bad. It's just that it's important to know who is making the decisions. I love these things that can really essentialize, Barry Lopez, the failure to love and the opportunity to love. It's not super complicated, though we can love to make it complicated. And this one question, am I going to show up to this moment, whether it's how I am in my own body mind right now, how I am with my friend, my child, my coworker, my parent, who knows, my tree in my front yard, my pet, my challenging lawmakers. Am I going to show up with as much attention, care, and affection as possible? Or am I going to choose something else? And we forget about deciding that it's good or bad. We just know, hey, I could make this choice. I could make this choice. So let's actually do that for a moment right now. Wherever you're listening to this, I often, if we're in person and in a group, I like to invite people to place a hand on the chest and maybe even rub a little bit. Our animal bodies can have such a powerful response to that presence of hand on the chest. So if you're in a place where that you can do that and where that invitation sounds appealing, maybe do so. But just take a moment to check in with this simple and beautiful question, like you might ask a good friend, but here you're asking your own inner life. Hey, how is it in there? How is it in there? And can you imagine practicing Maitri such that whatever is present in there, how many ever layers, we do contain multitudes, you could meet it with a quality of courageous friendliness. Say, oh, hello, I know you're there. And I'm not going to try to fix you or dominate you or get rid of you. Maybe even I'm here to get to know you a little bit better. And if you have some layers of sorrow, grief, tenderness, physical or mental pain, how is it to touch those, which can often elicit in many of us great disdain for our own pain? How would it be to bring some tenderness, some courageous kindness, and say, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, darling, I care about your suffering. Isn't it a miracle to know that this is even a possibility? I think probably I'm so drawn to this practice and these teachings, not only because they've profoundly benefited my life in the last 3 decades, but because I went a lot of my life without this. One former meditation teacher told me, he was also a psychotherapist, and he said, he experienced me as having the most intractable and crafty inner critic of any person he'd worked with as a meditation teacher or a therapist. Wow, that's intense. I used to suffer a lot from my own criticizing mean voices, and how amazing to discover through the practice of courageous befriending that they're so worried and they're really trying to keep me safe. And it really is a miracle, I'll say, that the mean voice, if it comes, I can touch it with compassion. Oh, sweetheart, do you need a hug? That's what I say to my son when he is having big feelings about something. I'm not going to try to argue with him about his experience or cheer him up, instantly to get him out of the mood he's in, but to say, hey, I'm right here with you as you're feeling your feelings. I'm right here with you. Can you imagine offering that to your inner life as a foundation for being able to offer that to the others, both human and the vast, more than human world around us? Now, I want to say often when the topic of something like a loving kindness that includes ourselves comes up, there's a few things I want to say about this. One is that we might be afraid this is spiritual bypassing. We're just going to avoid the difficult truths in our inner life or in the world to hurry up and get to some good feeling. And that's not what this is about. In my experience, the more people are able to embody this kind of courageous friendliness in their inner lives. Here's an example. I have been in groups with many white identified people, and the more courageous, loving kindness someone has, the less defensive they tend to be around topics like race. When their own shame or guilt or whatever feelings come up, they can courageously take care of that inside themselves. So they're available to learning how to do better, learning the changes that need to happen in systems that are rooted in harmful ways of being. Another something that comes up when we talk about loving kindness sometimes is people share a perspective that I think is on one hand really wise, which is it's terrible to yell self-care to someone when what they need is community care. And we can fail people when we're doing that. I do think there's truth to that. And also, I hope we don't need to make a false binary and torture ourselves yet again on a binary between either we can have kindness toward our inner lives or we can have community care. We all need both. Oh my God. And all the layers in between. We all need both. I'm thinking of Bell Hooks, who was a brilliant, I feel, very kindred spirit, who wrote and taught a lot about love. And she said, you know, whatever she's speaking about, even if it's full of challenging truths, it begins and ends with love. And there's a couple quotes of hers that I want to bring. One is when she says, love is the best antidote to the politics of domination. What a powerful perspective, isn't it? To not just exude more hate or more, how do I want to say it? More blaming, hateful othering. Love as the antidote to the politics of domination. We certainly need an antidote to the politics of domination. And just like Barry Lopez says, you know, the politics of domination is a failure to love. So let's embrace courageous, loving kindness that includes our inner lives, but is not limited to our inner lives, that includes the outer world, but is not limited to the outer world. So we can meet the failure to love with our willingness to courageously embody love. Just take a few breaths and notice how this is resonating in you. Does it sound like something you can use? Does it sound like, oh my God, I could never do that? Or this is just a lot of floofy talk? How's your bullshit detector and truth resonator in your heart and gut responding? I'd like to share a story about this. As I mentioned earlier, Stephen Levine and his books were first a very powerful teacher for me from the time I was a teenager many years ago. And there's a particular recording that I listened to way back when it was on tape that Stephen and his wife, Ondrea, made. And it's called To Love and Be Loved, The Difficult Yoga of Relationship. It's so good. Carl and I have probably listened to that at least 18 times. It's been a while since I've listened to it, but I think I know a lot of it by heart. And I have been so deeply moved by the teachings in that tape set, which is now available for download. But one of the stories that comes from that tape set is Ondrea speaking. And I was listening to this as I was driving in a van to go do personal retreat by myself. I was aiming to do a 6-week solo silent meditation retreat in a cabin in the mountains of southern Colorado. So my friend had loaned me their van, and as I was driving myself there, I was listening to this teaching from Stephen and Ondrea. And Ondrea said, and I've got to do her accent a little bit as best I can for you. She says, when somebody says they love you, it makes you nervous. You'll notice. If you're really paying attention, when somebody says, I love you, it makes you really nervous. And I was like, is that true? And feeling into my own body, wondering if, you know, when Carl said, I love you, did that make me nervous? And she said, until you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, Ondrea, You're lovable. She's got this wonderful voice. And as young 20 something me was driving and I heard her say that, I have an image that's like a caricature now because I think I must have squirted tears out of my eyeballs that probably hit the windshield in front of me. I was slain. Um, I couldn't believe she said that. And it occurred to me there was no way in hell I could say to myself, Erin, you're lovable. I had a long list. Maybe you can relate to something like this, a long list of the reasons I was unworthy, the things I had screwed up, my list of mistakes, the grudges I was holding against myself. But as I was on my way to retreat and I realized there was some potency in how deeply her words moved me and the presence of these tears, I thought, wow, I have to work with this. You know, there's a lot of teachings in this tradition I'm practicing in about this quality of loving kindness. Maybe I could try. So I got to my cabin. It's this tiny little cabin with a cistern underneath it, a little bit of water for washing dishes, weekly showers. There was a composting toilet, a tiny little propane burner, space to meditate, and a bed. And in this very spacious, beautiful mountainside. And I had to bring all my own drinking water. There was no refrigerator, so I was eating a lot of simple food. And I got the car unpacked, settled into my practice routine. I found it pretty settling to be alone and silent for those weeks. It really allowed me to slow down and realize, begin to feel the ridiculousness of the speediness of my city life. And, you know, I had done my morning meditation practice and maybe some journaling and a little movement practice. And there was this tiny little mirror about the height of my face on the door to the composting toilet bathroom. And I would look into my own eyes in the mirror and I would try to say, Erin, you're lovable. And I just about puked my guts out. I could not do it. I would just cry and cry. I couldn't. And day after day, I would come and try to, you know, in my afternoon break, look myself in the eyes in the mirror. And what I kept bumping up against was, as I mentioned before, this sense of, I have a really long list of things I've done wrong and things I'm not going to forgive myself for, the grudges I'm holding against my own imperfections. And I realized that before I could say, Erin, you're lovable, I had to forgive myself. That gave me a stepping stone. So I spent the next few afternoons looking myself in the eyes in the mirror and saying, Erin, I forgive you. And I would cry and cry. And, you know, the big release. And gratefully, I had the time to work with this daily and space to digest the big tears that would come out. And after, I don't know, maybe a week of looking at myself and forgiving myself and meaning it when I said it, you know, like it would help if I could just lay this down. I forgive you. That right there is an act of Maitri. And then I was able to start flirting with looking at my face in the mirror and saying, Erin, you're lovable, or I love you, or you're worthy of love. Of course, I was going through, you know, inner spasms and tears and all the awkwardness. It's a practice, right? Maitri, I love the description, as I said in the beginning, as courageous, unconditional friendliness toward all the layers, toward the one who was judging me, toward the one who felt judged, toward the one who felt so awkward trying to do something different in that scenario. And since then, over many years, I have been doing practices like this with myself and learning how do I want to say it, not dominate my inner life, not try to fix, which is another way of trying to reject who I am, but bravely befriending. And after having gone through some really rough times, um, particularly in a relationship with a spiritual teacher that turned very toxic, I had to do some real recovery and have my own back. Even when I left a community I had been a part of for more than a decade and had sort of lost a lot of friends and the teacher and all of that, it took a lot of courage to stay with the practice. And even if other people couldn't see it, to say, hey, I'm with you. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to abandon you. I have your back. And sweetheart, I care about your suffering. I love that phrase because it doesn't say, hey, cheer up, which is a way of sort of brushing away the suffering. Like, I'm uncomfortable with your suffering. Sometimes it's coming from a good place where we want to help someone feel better, but it can be rooted in our own discomfort with the struggling states. So, as Pema Chodron says, something like this, like, one of the definitions of loving kindness is bringing this quality of warm, compassionate presence to all your states, the beautiful, gorgeous, transcendent ones, the suffering, the grief, the awkward, the confused places, to bring a quality of grounded, embodied, spacious friendliness toward all of these layers. I think of the gorgeous poem that is called The Layers by Stanley Kunitz, and that beautiful line where he says, live in the layers, not on the litter. Live in the layers, not on the litter. So, by saying this courageous friendliness, it doesn't mean we have to like what we're practicing being respectful and friendly toward. Some part of us might really dislike our grief. Well, we can be friendly toward that one too. Oh, you're really uncomfortable with me feeling sad. I care about your suffering. And maybe we can even bring this radical sentiment. This has been one of the most healing sentiments for me in my own inner life. It takes courage to say, you don't have to be different than you are to receive my warmth. And if some other part pops up that really wants this one to be different, well, that one is who I next turn to with my courageous warmth. I don't know if you've seen the meme online. It has an illustration of a little cat driving something that looks like a little bulldozer. It's an illustration from a Richard Scarry children's book, and someone changed the words to something like, the cat is meeting his feelings with the smusher downer, and the cat is smushing down his hard feelings with the smusher downer. That's what a lot of us have been trained and conditioned to do. And it's a miracle, isn't it, to realize something else is possible? In my experience, it helps a lot to be with other people who exude this quality of friendliness and can show us how to do it. Another line from Bell Hooks, she said, self-love cannot flourish in isolation. So again, we don't need to make a binary and torture ourselves on either being friendly, needing a friend to teach us this or doing this with ourselves. We need both. We need both and then some. I just want to pause for another moment and invite us to check in. What's resonating in your inner life? I often say inside your chest and your gut and maybe your bones, you have a bullshit detector. You have beauty and truth resonators. Just notice how, if you include your body, your bodily knowing and responsiveness, that inner compass, what feels helpful or resonant for you at this moment in your life? I'm thinking right now to just include the layer of our moving bodies. So, this is such a big topic, and I'm just going to speak to it really briefly. But I have been a movement educator for my whole adult life. For 10 years, I taught yoga and yoga therapy. For a bit longer than that, I taught Tai Chi and Qigong. Starting in 2005, when I was certified to do so, I started teaching Feldenkrais, awareness through movement lessons, and then some. And I'm really struck by the way in which, how do I want to say this? A lot of our patterns, for example, if you have a smusher downer, if you have an inner meanie, and if you have somebody with the smusher downer tool smushing down your feelings, a lot of these exist as somatic patterns in how we're holding our posture, our shoulders, our belly, our pelvic floor, our clenched jaws, our eyes. And many of these are so, I want to say both old and young. Many of them come, they come in our ancestral inheritance. Sometimes they come in along with the kind of parenting we had, especially pre-verbally, that sense of how we inhabit our bodies, how we move, how we're able to soften to the support of the ground or not. If we're trying to hold ourselves up, if we hurry, I'm a recovering hurrier myself. My childhood had a lot of hurriedness in it that I carried in my tissues. And so working with this quality of brave befriending, courageous warmth, as we discover the way these things live in us in a bodily way, is just such a fruitful and important part of practice. So let me just ask you right now, if you're like me, I'm sometimes doing the dishes or on a walk or driving or whatever while I'm listening to a podcast, wherever you are, whatever you're doing physically. Maybe you can ask yourself this generative question, which is another doorway to Maitri. How could I make this less effortful and more pleasurable? Where might you reduce a little unnecessary effort? Make yourself 10% more comfortable, even if you're lifting weights, even if you're running. This isn't all just about getting soft and floppy. Kindness can have some great strength in it also. And this can be applied to all kinds of physicality. It's one of my favorite realms to explore somatically. And I think the Feldenkrais work is a brilliant gateway to this exploration because of the way we orient toward teaching and learning in that work is so respectful. It invites such a slowed downness that we can really feel what we're actually doing. It takes courage to do that. And I have to say, if we don't have the quality of courageous kindness, if we're beating ourselves for not being perfect, it's a miserable endeavor. And I think that's true, actually, as I say that, of just about everything. So if I think about the work that reconnects and deep ecology work, it's a tricky time to be alive. We're a lot of us coming awake to how much harm humans have been doing on the planet for centuries, how harmful what we take as normal in modern culture is to the viability of the Earth's ecosystem. And, you know, I think a lot about Brene Brown saying that blame is a way to discharge pain. Sometimes when we start to make these discoveries, the only way we know how to find relief is to point a finger at people who are worse than we are in our perception in some way, And if we can integrate not only in ourselves, but in our communities that we do this kind of exploration with, in our families, in our even digital communities, this commitment to a courageous respectfulness, a warm-heartedness, then it's okay for somebody to choose to be vegan and not be a jerk face to someone who's choosing something different. It's possible for someone, as some of my European and Australian friends have done, to decide they're never getting on an airplane again without needing to throw under the bus people who, for whatever reasons, still get on airplanes. It feels to me, as I'm speaking about it right now, like a kind of lubricant. Like, imagine how it could let our conversations flow. Our creativity could come forth more if we were in communities where this quality of Maitri, courageous, brave, befriending, was just a part of the fabric of how we are together. So, of course, you're going to screw up. Of course, I'm going to screw up. I can't remember who said this quote, perimenopause brain here, but it is that my best teacher is my last mistake. That's how we learn, actually, right? Through making lots of mistakes, we get better and better. And the quicker we can forgive ourselves and have a sense of humor and just return without spending a lot of time in self-hatred, self-flagellation, et cetera, for our imperfections, our perceived imperfections, just really just our humanness. I just have this feeling of how much it could free up our resources, our genius, our willingness, our creativity. A lot of life force of a lot of creative people on the planet is co-opted by their hatred of themselves or their intense orientation to fix and improve themselves. Very wisely, many years ago, the Zen teacher Cheri wrote that self-hatred often uses self-improvement as self-maintenance. The way self-hatred keeps itself going is by continually trying to improve ourselves. It's a way of rejecting who we are to try to be different. So once again, let's just pause a moment. Maybe you want to place a hand on your heart. Feel the ground underneath you. So if big feelings are coming up listening to any of this, really feel you're not alone. You're held. You're on the earth, in this body, in this moment, in this place. Feel your breath. Maybe as you breathe for the next few breaths, you could courageously practice softening your belly. So there are many layers to this, and I could talk on and on about it, but I'm going to save that for a class I'm teaching this year as I'm shifting things in my work, and I've had some health challenges for the last several months. I've decided that I want to work a lot smarter, not harder. I'm going to be doing fewer classes, but I can really pour my whole heart into them, feel less hurried and less busy. And I'm working on my 2 books right now. But the first class I'm going to be offering in 2023, when I sat down to really do some inner listening about what wants to come and what's really needed in the world. And it came to me right away. It is this quality of Maitri. As I said in the beginning, often whatever I'm teaching, really this is at the core of it, because I see in its absence, if we're doing a movement practice without this quality of kindness, if we're trying to do deep ecology work or activism or anti-racist work without this quality of kindness, fill in the blank. Basically, if you're doing anything without this warm-hearted presence, it can be a recipe for a lot of suffering. So I'm excited to be teaching this class on Maitri, brave befriending, courageous loving kindness. We include ourselves. We're going to spend time, of course, befriending this here body mind, this here heart as a foundation, but we don't stop there. So I always think of Mary Oliver's line from one of my favorites of her poems that is called "To Begin With, the Sweet Grass." She says, first love yourself, then forget it, then love the world. Love yourself enough that you can forget yourself in a certain way and have a lot of love to give to this world so deeply in need of our courageous love. So I hope you have found something supportive, helpful, nourishing to your dear heart mind in this conversation. And if you have any interest in joining me, I would sure love to have you in this class. We start on March 5th, 2023, teaching it live online, but you're also welcome to participate just through the recordings. So thank you so much for being here and for participating in our podcast. We're grateful to have you as a part of our community. I'd like to share in closure one of my favorite prayers that I have been in relationship with for probably at least 25 years. This was shared with me by one of my Tibetan teachers, Tsokmi Rinpoche. And it's sort of an aspiration prayer. May the precious mind of bodhicitta, that's the awakened heart mind, may it arise where it has not arisen. And where it has arisen, may it not fade away, but grow and flourish infinitely forever. May the precious recognition of interbeing arise where it has not arisen. And where it has arisen, may it not fade away, but grow and flourish infinitely forever. And may the precious conduct of nonviolence arise where it has not arisen. And where it has arisen, may it not fade away, but grow and flourish infinitely forever.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.